The terminal of Orion Station was full that evening, packed with travelers of many races. Humans in travel coats, aliens with strange colors and shapes, merchants carrying boxes, children running between the benches, all were waiting for the next ship. The air smelled of metal, oil, and food from the vendors. The loudspeaker called out names and flight numbers, but nobody really listened. Everyone was tired, restless, and waiting for their chance to leave. In the middle of this noise, there was one seat left empty. It stood near the edge of the hall, close to the wide glass window that showed the stars outside. People passed by it, looked at it, but no one sat down. Maybe they thought someone had already claimed it. Maybe they were too polite to take it. But one young human man noticed it, and he kept glancing toward it as he stood holding his small bag. His name was Daniel, and he had worked a long shift repairing machines on the lower decks. His legs ached, and his eyes burned with lack of sleep. That seat looked like the best thing in the galaxy right now. But before Daniel could move, something else happened. A weak figure stumbled into the hall from the docking corridor. He was tall but bent with age, his skin pale blue with faint cracks like dry stone. His robes were heavy, worn down from years of use, and his breathing sounded rough, like every inhale was a battle. He was an alien elder from a race Daniel had only seen a few times. The crowd noticed him but quickly looked away. No one wanted to deal with an old man slowing down the line. The elder leaned on his walking stick, searching for somewhere to sit. His eyes, glowing faintly with age, passed over the benches already full of people. He saw the last empty seat. His body shook as he tried to walk toward it. Daniel stepped forward at the same time. He wanted that seat. He needed it. But as he watched the elder move with trembling steps, his heart pulled against his tired body. He stopped and let the old one reach the seat first. The alien elder's steps were so slow it felt like minutes passed between each one. Finally, he reached the seat and looked down at it, but he could not lower himself easily. His hands shook. His knees bent but refused to bend all the way. The people nearby only watched, some whispering, others turning their heads away. Nobody offered help. Daniel sighed, then made a decision. He stepped forward, placed his bag on the ground, and spoke in a steady voice. "Please sit here. Take my place." The elder looked at him, confused. "Your place?" Daniel gave a tired smile. "Yes, sir." "Sit down before you fall. I can stand." The elder's eyes widened. His lips moved as if searching for words. Slowly, with Daniel's support, he lowered himself into the seat. His old bones creaked, and when he finally sat, relief flooded his face. He let out a deep sigh, almost like a whisper of gratitude. "Thank you, human," the elder said softly. His voice was thin, almost broken, but it carried weight. Daniel nodded. "Don't mention it." He picked up his bag and leaned against the wall nearby. His legs still hurt and he still wanted to sit, but at least now the elder was safe. Around them, the terminal grew quieter. People had seen what happened. Humans and aliens both stared, some with surprise, some with judgment. A few whispered to each other. It was strange. Something as small as giving up a seat had caught the attention of so many. At the far side of the hall, a group of armored alien soldiers stood in a row. Their armor gleamed under the station lights, and their weapons hung at their sides. They were talking among themselves when one of them noticed the elder sitting down. His eyes widened and he nudged the others. Soon all of them were staring at the human standing by the window and the old alien resting on the bench. The soldiers began to move. Step by step, their heavy boots echoed through the terminal. The crowd shifted nervously, unsure what was about to happen. Whispers rose again. Daniel noticed them only when they were close. His heart thumped. Why were soldiers walking toward him? He had done nothing wrong. He only gave up a seat. The elder looked up and saw them too. His weak hands tightened around his walking stick. For a brief second, Daniel wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. The soldiers stopped in front of him. Their armor was black and silver, their helmets shining under the lights. The tallest one raised his hand as if ready to strike or accuse. The crowd held its breath. Daniel braced himself. but the elder raised a trembling hand. His voice came out soft, yet the soldiers froze at once. They looked at him, then at Daniel, and something like shock passed over their faces. The terminal fell silent. Even the loudspeakers seemed to fade away. Daniel had no idea why every eye in the room was now fixed on him. The soldiers stood like a wall of iron before Daniel, their shadows stretching across the floor of the terminal. Every pair of eyes in the hall turned to watch. The crowd that once buzzed with chatter had fallen into silence. Even the children who had been running between the benches were frozen, clutching their parents' hands. Daniel's throat felt dry. He had no weapon, no protection, nothing but his small bag of tools. His heart pounded as he tried to read their intentions. The soldiers' helmets reflected the bright lights, hiding their faces. Were they about to arrest him? Punish him? All because he gave a seat to an old man. The elder sat hunched, breathing slowly, his hand resting on his stick. He didn't speak at first. He only looked up at the soldiers as though testing them, as though waiting to see what they would do. The silence stretched so long that Daniel wanted to shout, but his instincts told him to stay quiet. Finally, one soldier broke the silence. His deep voice cut through the air like a blade. "Human," he said, the word heavy, almost accusing. "Do you know who this is?" Daniel blinked, confused. "Who?" He glanced at the elder, then back at the soldier. "No, sir. I just saw someone who needed a seat." The soldier tilted his head slightly as if studying Daniel's face. The other soldiers exchanged quick looks. The crowd leaned closer, desperate to hear. From the far rows, whispers spread. "He doesn't know. He really doesn't know." Daniel frowned. He wanted to ask, "Know what?" But before he could, a sound rose behind him. Someone scoffed. A merchant with green scales shook his head and muttered loud enough for others to hear. Humans. Always pretending to be kind. He only did it for attention. A few aliens near him nodded, murmuring agreement. Others shook their heads, whispering that maybe the human didn't understand the danger. The room was divided. Some saw Daniel's act as bravery, others as foolishness, and some as a trick. Daniel clenched his jaw but said nothing. He wasn't going to argue with strangers. He had only done what felt right. The elder finally lifted his head. His eyes glowed faintly in the station lights, old but piercing. He looked directly at Daniel, then at the soldiers. His lips moved, forming words too soft for most to hear. But the soldiers heard. Their rigid posture shifted. A ripple of shock passed through them, though their faces stayed hidden behind their helmets. The crowd sensed something had changed. The whispers grew louder. A child asked, "Mama, why are they staring at him?" The mother hushed her quickly, but her own eyes never left Daniel. One soldier dropped to one knee in front of the elder. The others stiffened, uncertain, but soon followed. Armor clinked as heavy boots struck the floor in unison. They were kneeling, not to the elder, but facing Daniel as though his presence demanded respect. Gasps filled the hall. Daniel's stomach dropped. He looked around, half expecting someone to laugh and reveal it was all a cruel joke. But no one laughed. Every face was serious, every eye locked on him. The elder spoke again, louder this time, his voice shaking but steady enough to carry across the terminal. "This human gave me his seat. When none of you moved, he alone saw me." His words echoed through the hall. The merchant who had scoffed earlier looked away in shame. A few others lowered their heads, but most only watched in stunned silence, as if the ground beneath them had shifted. Daniel swallowed hard. He didn't understand why this was so important. To him, it had been a simple choice, a tired man letting an old one rest. But from the way the soldiers reacted, from the way the crowd held its breath, it meant something far greater. The elder leaned on his stick and looked directly at the kneeling soldiers. "Do you understand what this means?" he asked them, his voice trembling. The leader of the soldiers bowed his head. "Yes, elder. We understand." The elder's gaze returned to Daniel. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The station's noise faded, and only the sound of his own heartbeat filled Daniel's ears. He wanted to speak, to ask what was going on, but the elder's eyes silenced him. Finally, the elder smiled, faint but genuine. "Compassion," he whispered, though everyone heard, "is the rarest strength of all." The words struck the crowd like lightning. Gasps, murmurs, even tears followed. Some passengers lowered their heads in shame, while others clutched their hearts as if reminded of something long forgotten. The soldiers stood again, taller now, but their stance had changed. They were no longer a threat, they were guardians, watchful but respectful. And all of them looked at Daniel not as an outsider, but as someone worthy of honor. Daniel shifted uneasily under their gaze. He had no idea what storm he had just stepped into. He only knew that something had begun, something far larger than he could imagine. At the far end of the terminal, an officer entered, alerted by the unusual silence. When he saw soldiers standing at attention and the crowd gathered, his eyes narrowed. "What happened here?" he demanded. No one answered right away. They only turned toward Daniel, and in that moment, Daniel realized with a sinking heart, he was at the center of something he never asked for. The officer's boots struck the floor with sharp rhythm as he moved closer. His uniform was darker than the soldiers', marked with silver edges and the crest of command. His eyes scanned the scene, the kneeling soldiers, the silent crowd, the alien elder resting on the seat. And finally Daniel, standing awkwardly with his bag still in hand. "What is this?" the officer demanded, his voice hard and cutting through the air like steel. The soldiers stiffened but did not answer. Their heads remained slightly bowed, their eyes locked on Daniel. The officer frowned, confused. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing at the human. "You," he barked, "what did you do to them?" Daniel raised his hands slightly, palms open, showing he had nothing. "Nothing, sir," he said honestly. "I only gave my seat to the elder." The officer's face darkened. "Only a seat?" His tone carried disbelief, almost anger, as if he thought Daniel was mocking him. "That's all?" The elder lifted his head. His voice was raspy, but it cut through the silence with a surprising force. "That is enough," the officer froze. The elder's words seemed to strike him deeper than any insult. For a moment fear flashed across his eyes. He lowered his head quickly, almost in a bow. "Elder, forgive me, I did not realize you were here." Gasps swept through the crowd. The word elder traveled like fire across dry grass. People began whispering frantically. Some knew what it meant. Others asked their neighbors in confusion. But all of them felt the weight of the title. Daniel looked at the alien beside him again. He had seemed frail, weak, just another tired old traveler. But now, with a single word, the entire hall shifted around him. The soldiers treated him like royalty. The officer bowed, and the crowd stared as if in the presence of something holy. The elder's eyes turned back to Daniel. "This human did not see me as a title," he said slowly. "He did not see rank or power or history. He only saw a weary old man and gave me what he had. That is why I honor him." The soldiers struck their fists against their armor plates in unison, a sound like thunder shaking the air. They stood straight and their gaze returned to Daniel. This time it was not suspicion. It was recognition. Silent recognition. Daniel's chest tightened. He didn't understand any of this. I didn't mean, you meant enough," the elder interrupted. His voice was softer now, but it carried the weight of finality. In a galaxy filled with pride and selfishness, kindness is rare. Too rare, the officer bowed deeper. "Elder, your will is law. Shall we escort this human?" The elder raised his hand to stop him. "No, he is not to be ordered or forced. He gave freely, and freely he shall walk. Remember that." The officer nodded quickly, ashamed of his earlier tone. Meanwhile, the crowd had begun to shift. Some people bowed their heads in respect. Others simply stared at Daniel with wide eyes, as though he had transformed into someone larger than life. A human standing alone in a hall filled with hundreds had become the center of every gaze. Daniel wanted to disappear. His hands gripped his bag tighter. He wasn't a hero, he wasn't anyone special. He just didn't want an old man to fall. Yet here he was, surrounded by soldiers and watched by strangers who whispered as if he had changed history. Two children, alien twins with silver skin, stepped forward from the crowd. Their mother tried to pull them back, but they slipped free. They walked right up to Daniel, their eyes glowing softly. One of them bowed, clumsy but sincere. "Thank you, human," the child whispered. Daniel blinked. He didn't know what to say. He gave a small nod, forcing a faint smile. The gesture only made the whispers grow louder. The elder leaned back in the seat, breathing heavier now, but there was a faint smile on his lips. He seemed at peace. "Do you see?" he said to the officer, to the soldiers, to everyone listening. "Respect does not come from command. It comes from compassion. That is what this human reminded us of." The officer bowed once more, then turned sharply to his soldiers. "Attention," he barked. Instantly the soldiers snapped into a line, their boots striking the ground as they formed ranks. They stood tall, their heads high, but their eyes never left Daniel. For the first time in his life, Daniel was being honored by soldiers who owed him nothing. Not for strength, not for power, not for victory, but for kindness. The station's loudspeaker crackled to life again, calling for boarding of the next shuttle. But no one moved. No one wanted to break the moment. The entire terminal had become a stage, and Daniel was at the center of it. His heart raced, and he whispered under his breath, "What have I gotten myself into?" The elder heard him and gave a soft chuckle. "Into something greater than yourself, human. Into something the galaxy has long forgotten." As the shuttle doors opened with a hiss, the soldiers turned in unison. Instead of boarding first as they usually did, they stepped aside, clearing the path. The leader raised his hand in salute, not to the elder this time, but to Daniel. And slowly, one by one, the other soldiers followed. The crowd gasped again, their eyes wide, their hearts racing. No one in living memory had ever seen soldiers salute a human civilian. Daniel's face burned with embarrassment, but deep inside, something else stirred, a strange feeling that maybe, just maybe, this moment was the beginning of something he could not yet see. The shuttle's doors remained open, but no one moved. The soldiers stood in formation, their salute frozen in the air. The crowd whispered and shifted, unable to look away from the strange scene. Daniel stood there, his bag in hand, wondering if he had somehow stepped into the middle of a play where he did not know his role. The elder rested back in the seat, his breathing heavy but his eyes sharp and alive. Slowly he lifted his head and looked at the officer. "Do you not recognize him?" The officer frowned, confused. "Recognize who, elder?" The elder's lips curved into the faintest smile. His voice, though weak, carried across the hall like a bell. "The spirit of humanity, a race forgotten, mocked, doubted. Yet here he stands before you." The officer stiffened, but the elder's gaze turned back to Daniel. "Tell me your name, human." Daniel blinked, startled. All eyes were on him. He swallowed and said, "Daniel Hayes." The elder repeated it softly, as though tasting it. "Daniel Hayes." Then, with a strength that did not seem possible for his frail body, he raised his voice. "Remember this name." The words thundered through the terminal. The soldier's eyes widened. The officer took a sharp breath, and the crowd rippled with murmurs. "Daniel Hayes," someone whispered. The elder spoke his name. The soldiers lowered their salutes, but instead of relaxing, they straightened further, as if the name itself demanded honor. The officer looked at Daniel with something close to fear. Daniel's stomach twisted. He hadn't asked for this. Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice barely steady. The elder leaned forward, his hands trembling on his stick. "Because names carry weight, human, and yours must be remembered." Confusion spread across Daniel's face. He wanted to argue, to say he was nobody, just a tired worker on a station he didn't even like. But then the elder whispered again, this time softer, only for the soldiers closest to him. A name. Not Daniel's. A name older, heavier, laced with history. The soldiers reacted at once. Their heads snapped toward the elder, then toward Daniel, and their stance shifted into one of near reverence. The officer stumbled back a step, his mouth opening slightly in shock. The name spread among them like fire, and though Daniel didn't hear it, he could feel its weight. The crowd pressed closer, desperate to catch even a hint of what had been said. Mothers lifted their children to see. Merchants stopped clutching their bags. Even the guards near the docking corridor leaned forward. Daniel frowned. "What did you say?" The elder's eyes locked onto his, burning with an intensity that cut through his frail form. "A name you are not yet ready to carry," he said softly. "But the galaxy will know it soon." Daniel's skin prickled. He wanted to demand an answer, but he could see the soldiers' faces, or rather what was visible of them behind their helmets. It wasn't anger. It wasn't suspicion. It was something far stranger. Awe. The officer, His hands, trembling, turned toward the elder. Elder, if what you say is true, then this human, he cannot remain unnoticed. Word will spread. The elder nodded slowly. It must spread. The galaxy has forgotten the value of kindness. They have forgotten what strength truly is. Let them remember. The officer swallowed hard, then bowed his head again. The whisper of the hidden name began to leak into the crowd. Some heard it from the soldiers, some guessed at it, and soon the terminal was buzzing with wild speculation. Could it be? No, that name was lost in the wars. But the elder would not speak it lightly. Daniel felt his head spin. He didn't understand what any of it meant, but he knew one thing. Whatever name the elder had spoken, it was not just a word. It was a symbol, something powerful, something that made even armored soldiers act like humble servants. The elder lifted a shaking hand and placed it on Daniel's arm. His grip, though weak, carried a strange weight. "Do not be afraid," he said gently. "You are more than you believe." Daniel stared down at him, struggling to find words. "I'm just a man," he muttered. The elder smiled faintly. "So is every legend before the galaxy called their name." The crowd murmured again. The whispers grew into waves, bouncing off the metal walls of the terminal. Daniel's name and the unknown one the elder had whispered mixed together, creating a storm of confusion and awe. Then slowly, one by one, members of the crowd began to stand straighter. Some bowed slightly toward Daniel. Others placed a hand over their chest, a silent sign of respect. It spread like a quiet fire until nearly the entire terminal was acknowledging him in some way. Daniel's face burned. He wanted to vanish into the crowd, to escape this strange honor he had never asked for. But the elder's grip held him steady. The soldiers moved aside again, forming a protective circle not against Daniel, but for him. They stood like a shield, their bodies ready to face any who might threaten him. Daniel looked around helplessly. His small act of kindness had turned into something vast, something dangerous. His seat was gone, but in its place, he had been given a weight far heavier than he could carry. And as the whispers grew louder, Daniel knew one thing: the galaxy would never see him the same way again. The silence inside the terminal felt heavy, like the air itself was waiting. Daniel stood frozen, his bag hanging loosely from his hand, his heart pounding louder than the station engines outside. Around him, soldiers in shining armor shifted into formation. They weren't aiming weapons, they weren't threatening him. Instead, their eyes, those who dared lift their visors, burned with respect. The officer gave a sharp command. "Form ranks." The soldiers moved as one, boots striking the floor in perfect rhythm. They spread across the terminal, lining up along the benches and corridors. The crowd, pushed back by the sudden motion, gasped and whispered, unsure of what was happening. Mothers clutched their children tighter. Merchants pulled their bags closer, but no one dared leave. Everyone wanted to witness whatever this was becoming. Daniel's mouth was dry. "What are you doing?" he asked softly, his words almost lost in the vast hall. The officer looked at him, then bowed his head slightly, just enough to show respect but not weakness. "We honor you, human. We honor what you have done." Daniel shook his head quickly. No, I just gave up a seat." "That's all. I'm not—" The elder's frail voice interrupted. "Do you not see, Daniel Hayes? In a galaxy of pride and coldness, your axe shines like fire in the dark. That is why they stand." And then it happened. The first soldier, tall and broad with a scar across his cheek, lifted his hand to his forehead and gave a salute. Firm, steady, unshakable. The sound of his armored glove against his helmet echoed like a hammer in the silence. Another soldier followed, then another. One by one, down the line, they raised their hands in perfect rhythm. The sharp sound of armor striking armor filled the air over and over, until the entire hall shook with the force of it. The crowd gasped. Some covered their mouths. Others clutched their hearts. Never before had they seen alien soldiers bow in respect, not to a king, not to a general, but to a human who had done nothing more than show kindness. Daniel's face burned with embarrassment. His chest tightened as if the weight of 1,000 eyes was crushing him. "Stop," he whispered under his breath. "Please, stop." But they did not. The officer himself was last. He stood at the front of the line, looking Daniel directly in the eye. His expression was unreadable, but his salute was sharp, flawless, filled with conviction. When his hand struck his helmet, the sound was louder than the rest, and the crowd erupted in whispers. Did you see? They salute the human. This will be remembered. Children tugged on their parents' sleeves, asking why soldiers would salute someone so ordinary. And parents, unable to explain, simply shook their heads in awe. Daniel wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at him to leave, to disappear into the crowd, to forget this ever happened. But he couldn't move. The soldiers' line boxed him in, and the elder's gaze anchored him where he stood. The elder raised his stick, tapping it gently against the floor. This is not for you alone, Daniel. This is for what you represent, for what your people can still be. Daniel looked down at him, eyes wide. I'm not a leader. I'm not a soldier. I'm just me, the elder smiled faintly. And that is why it matters. Kindness from the strong is expected. Kindness from the weak is rare. But kindness from the ordinary, that is what changes worlds. The words struck Daniel harder than any salute. His throat tightened, and for the first time since this madness began, he realized the truth. Maybe it wasn't about him at all. Maybe it was about something larger, something he had stumbled into without meaning to. The officer turned sharply to the crowd. His voice was loud, commanding. You will remember this day. You will tell your children what you saw. A human gave his seat, and soldiers stood in honor. Let this truth spread beyond these walls. The whispers grew louder, filling every corner of the hall. People pulled out recorders, capturing the scene, their hands shaking with excitement. This moment would not stay hidden. It would spread through channels, stations, and entire star systems. Daniel's stomach twisted. The thought of his name echoing across the galaxy terrified him. But the elder's words replayed in his mind, soft but unyielding. Kindness from the ordinary changes worlds. As the soldiers lowered their salutes, their boots struck the ground in unison like thunder rolling across the station. The sound made Daniel's chest shake, and then the elder spoke again, his voice quiet but powerful. This is the beginning. You do not yet understand, Daniel Hayes, but you will. Daniel stared at him, his pulse racing, his mind spinning. He wanted to shout, to demand answers, but the elder only leaned back in the seat, his frail body trembling with exhaustion, his eyes glowing faintly with peace. The shuttle's doors closed with a hiss, leaving the crowd locked in this moment of history. And Daniel, still standing among soldiers, realized he had crossed a line that could never be erased. He wasn't just a tired worker anymore. He was something else, something the galaxy had decided to notice. The echoes of the soldiers' salute still hung in the air. The crowd remained hushed, afraid to break the weight of the moment. Even the loudspeakers had gone silent, as if the station itself dared not interrupt. Daniel stood stiff, his hands clenched around the strap of his bag, his heart beating so hard he thought others could hear it. The elder, still seated on the last empty chair, shifted slowly. His frail hands gripped his stick, and with visible effort he pulled himself to his feet. A murmur ran through the crowd. No one dared move to help him, though many wanted to. The soldiers stepped forward, ready to steady him, but he waved them back with a trembling hand. I must stand on my own, he whispered. His voice was thin, but in the quiet hall every word carried. Daniel instinctively reached out, but the elder shook his head gently. He straightened, his bent back struggling against years of age, and turned to face the soldiers first. You honor me, the elder said, his words slow but deliberate. But you forget what honor means. Armor and weapons do not make you noble. Power does not make you worthy. Today you learned from a human what true honor is. The soldiers bowed their heads. None dared argue. Then with surprising steadiness, the elder turned toward Daniel. His glowing eyes locked onto him, not as if looking at a stranger, but as if staring into his very soul. He raised a thin, shaking hand. Daniel Hayes, he said, his voice growing stronger with every syllable. You gave without expecting. You saw without judgment. You acted without hesitation. In my long years, I have seen empires rise and fall, and warriors crush worlds. But rarely have I seen the simple heart of kindness shine as brightly as yours. Daniel's throat tightened. His lips parted to speak, but no words came. He had no answer for such praise. The elder reached out. Daniel hesitated, then stepped closer, letting the frail hand rest on his. The elder's skin was cold, yet there was a strange warmth that seemed to travel into Daniel's chest like a pulse of quiet power. The crowd leaned forward, holding their breath. Even the children were silent now, sensing something sacred was unfolding. I bless you, the elder said softly. Not as a soldier, not as a leader, but as one who carries the rare strength of compassion. May your path be protected. May your steps guide others. And may your kindness outlive even your own life. Gasps rippled across the hall. Blessings from elders of his kind were not given lightly. In many cultures, such blessings were believed to bind fate itself. For the soldiers, it was a holy moment. For the crowd, it was history being carved before their eyes. Daniel's chest tightened as the elder's words settled inside him like a weight. He shook his head quickly, whispering, I'm not someone important, the elder smiled faintly. That is what makes you worthy. The officer, his face pale with awe, stepped forward and bowed deeply to Daniel. From this day forward, wherever our banners fly, your name will be spoken. Not because of strength, but because of mercy. The soldiers struck their fists against their chests again, the sound rolling like thunder. This time it wasn't just respect, it was commitment. A vow. Daniel's hands trembled. His world had tilted completely. This wasn't what he wanted. He hadn't asked for any of this. He was just a tired man, a mechanic with sore legs, and now he was the center of something vast, something unstoppable. The elder squeezed his hand gently. Do not fear what follows. You are not alone. You carry with you a truth that even armies cannot silence. Tears pricked at the corners of Daniel's eyes, though he blinked them back. He had not cried in years, but something about the elder's voice, the weight of those words, broke past his walls. From the crowd, a woman stepped forward. She was alien, tall and graceful, her skin lined with silver patterns. She bowed her head toward Daniel. Your kindness gives us hope, she said quietly. Others soon followed. Merchants, travelers, strangers of every shape and color, offering nods, bows, or whispered words of gratitude. Daniel felt the ground shift beneath him. What began as a simple gesture had turned into a movement, a spark that spread like fire through dry grass. And it was no longer just about him. It was about everyone who had ever been overlooked, ignored, or dismissed. The elder slowly sank back into the chair, exhaustion finally pulling at him. His breathing grew heavy, but his eyes still glowed faintly. It is done, he whispered. Daniel knelt beside him, unsure what else to do. Rest, he said softly. The elder gave a small smile. Not yet. There is one more step, Daniel frowned. What step? The elder's voice weakened, but his eyes did not waver. The galaxy will test you, human. You have been marked, not by me, but by your own actions. They will come for you. Some with honor, some with envy, some with hate. You must stand firm. A chill ran down Daniel's spine. He wanted to protest, to insist again that he wasn't a hero, but the elder's words silenced him. The officer gave another sharp salute. Elder, shall we escort you back to safety? The elder shook his head. Safety does not exist. Not anymore, but this human will carry forward what must be remembered. Daniel looked around the hall. The soldiers stood like statues, the crowd whispered in awe, and every eye was still on him. He felt the weight of 1,000 futures pressing against his shoulders, and in that moment he realized the elder's blessing was not a gift. It was a burden, a sacred burden he could never set down. The station's terminal still buzzed with whispers. The soldiers stood in a solemn circle, the officer stiff and watchful, while the elder rested heavily in the seat he had been given. Daniel stood close by, the elder's blessing still echoing in his mind like thunder that refused to fade. He wanted to shrink back into the crowd to become invisible again, but there was no going back. Every face in the hall had seen what happened. Every voice carried his name. And as the elder had warned, the galaxy itself seemed to lean in, waiting for what came next. The loudspeaker broke the silence at last. Final call for boarding Shuttle 47 to the inner colonies. Travelers stirred, but few moved. No one wanted to miss what might still unfold. Mothers whispered to their children. Merchants clutched their bags, torn between leaving and staying. The soldiers held position as if protecting a holy ground. Daniel shifted his bag nervously. I should go, he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. The elder lifted his head, eyes glowing faintly. Yes, he said softly. Go, Daniel Hayes, but remember, you do not walk as you did before. You carry my blessing. You carry their respect. He gestured faintly toward the soldiers, who stood like statues carved from iron. Daniel swallowed hard. I never asked for this, the elder gave a small smile. The greatest burdens are never asked for. That is what makes them pure. The officer stepped forward. Human, the shuttle will wait for you. Board when you wish. No one here will move until you do. Gasps rippled through the hall. A human being given such deference on an alien station? It was unheard of. Yet no one objected. Even the travelers who were late for the shuttle stayed still, caught between awe and fear. Daniel hesitated, then glanced at the elder. Will you be all right? The elder's faint smile lingered. I am at peace. My path nears its end, but yours is just beginning. Daniel's chest tightened. He wanted to argue, to insist again that he was nothing more than an ordinary man. But deep inside something stirred, a spark he couldn't deny. The blessing had planted itself in him, whether he wanted it or not. The soldier stepped aside as he moved toward the shuttle. Their boots struck the floor in perfect unison, a sound like thunder rolling across the hall. As Daniel walked past, one soldier dropped to a knee. Then another. Soon the entire line had bent, heads lowered, fists pressed against their armor. The crowd erupted in gasps. Some bowed their heads. Others lifted their recording devices higher, desperate to capture every detail. In that instant, Daniel Hayes became more than a man. He became a symbol. He froze at the edge of the shuttle doors, overwhelmed. Why me? He whispered under his breath. The elder, his voice faint but steady, called out across the hall. Because you did not ask why. You simply acted. The words struck Daniel like a blade. His throat tightened, his chest heavy. He stepped into the shuttle and the doors hissed shut behind him. But the moment did not end there. As the shuttle pulled away from the docking bay, the crowd still buzzed. The elder lowered himself back into the seat, his body frail, his breath slow. A merchant leaned close, whispering, Elder, who was he truly? The elder closed his eyes, his voice barely more than a whisper. He was human, and that is enough. The story did not stay in the terminal. By the time the shuttle left orbit, messages had already spread across channels. Footage of soldiers saluting, of the elder's blessing, of Daniel's name being spoken, traveled faster than light. On distant colonies, people replayed the images. On war-torn worlds, soldiers whispered of a human who reminded them of honor. On quiet farms and crowded cities, children asked their parents who Daniel Hayes was and why soldiers would kneel for him. Some scoffed, saying it was a trick, a staged performance. Others felt hope stir in their hearts for the first time in years. But no one ignored it. The story spread, unstoppable. And Daniel, sitting in his seat on the shuttle, head resting against the cold glass, had no idea. He thought he had left the moment behind him. He thought the whispers would fade. He thought life would return to normal. But the galaxy had already decided otherwise. The elder's words echoed across systems, retold in markets, in barracks, in schools. Kindness from the ordinary changes worlds. And every time his name was spoken, Daniel Hayes grew into something larger than himself. A mechanic who gave up a seat. A human who carried compassion in a galaxy that had forgotten it. A man who became the heart of a legend. And so it began. The story of a simple act that no one would ever forget.